Welcome to Bridge of Friendship and Cross Border Talk, another podcast which we dedicate to the issue of social change and agency in Southeastern Europe. It is an issue which becomes more and more important as our countries look for their place, maybe, in a changing world. And as we face various problems, social problems, political problems, other problems in our societies, and we also need a positive version of what happens in order to be active and maybe want more. So we are going to discuss about a number of issues related to social change and agency in our region with a person which I believe could speak a lot and has a lot to say. This is Codru Vrabie, who is an expert on good governance from Romania. He has been a trainer in various programs for good governance, reforming justice, preparation of young leaders, and others uh, in Romania and the Republic of Moldova. And he is also a graduate of the American University in Bulgaria, which I believe makes him well positioned in contact with a number of allies in these countries and knowledgeable about societies. So I hope we will offer a lot of good ideas and concepts about how to frame these ideas of change and agency, because I have the feeling we too much um, uh, reduce these issues to something very limited. And for me, it's not so much change is not so much being pro and anti, at least for me, somebody politically or geopolitically. But for me, change is maybe thinking in more complex terms, first of all, about everything. So, Kodru, welcome to the podcast. And let me start with first maybe some attempt at definition. We have had many theories about what change means in our region, which maybe many people agree it's kind of a little bit peripheral to the EU. There is this theory that change means old allies or allies from the transition being replaced by new allies, by, let's say, more modern, more technological, or whatever you call them, more clean allies. There is this idea that change maybe means that oligarchical superstructure of society is replaced by some superstructure related to corporate and NGO sector. There is idea of change which empowers workers and salaried workers especially. Um, Also, there are some people fight for change in the sense of changing the balance between national capital and international capital into the benefit of national capital. That is also a version of change for some people. And there are many ways to many battles, let's say, which people maybe carry in our societies under the banner of change. It could be human rights, it could be traditional family, it could be internationalization, it could be patriotism. We see different divisions, and in a way, everyone fights for some change if he has some level of consciousness. But let us start with your perspective on that. What does change mean in our region?
Zdrasti, Vladimir. Salut in Romanian. You posed a lot of questions related to change. I would bring it closer to home from a perspective that everybody is probably accustomed to, and that is, a puddle of water that simply sits, and as time goes by, it starts to produce organic matter and starts to rot. So if there is no change in that puddle of water to bring in a little oxygen or some other things, then little by little that particular puddle of water will turn into murk and to mush. It will start smelling like a rotten body, and then ultimately the water evaporates and everything dies. So to me, change is a synonym for life. And everybody wants to have a better life, prosperity in a sense. So I think that's the way I look at change in our societies, whether it be within the European Union or outside the European Union, as is the case for Moldova.
Okay, but that is very general. And if we look at...
let's take it step by step and go back to the specific questions that you had, because it was just too much all of a sudden.
Okay, so what change do our societies need? If I may try to make the question a little bit more concrete. In what directions should we change? What is the direction of life which we should follow?
I think for all these three neighboring countries, Bulgaria, Romania, and Moldova, we have a lot of economic inequality, which translates in a high proportion of the population living in poverty or at the edge of poverty, so to say. Very specific problems related to social assistance and education in general, public health. And this is one area where all three countries need to change quite rapidly. We did have this summer a huge scandal in Romania related to healthcare centers for the elderly and disabled. One top politician, specifically the Minister of Labor, and another one, the Minister for Family Issues, both of them related to social protection, generally speaking, were somehow involved in this scandal. Sort of a big-scale corruption scheme where these health centers were simply milking state subsidies for the private benefit of the minister and their family. This is something that needs to change, in the sense that we need higher standards when it relates to social protection and healthcare, and we need to get rid of corruption. So a more, so to say, we can achieve more economic equality in our countries if we manage to fix these particular systems in such a way that we provide, first of all, safety for our citizens. And I think this is an important component for change.
Okay. We are societies which have passed through some transition, and it's been a painful transition with a huge social price, especially for the older generations. and it's been a transition which maybe has empowered some people who are called dubious or even mafiots, maybe in Bulgaria. And it is also a transition which is related to some kind of trauma, as people who have had their relatively clear position about who they are, what they work professionally, what is their value system, had to go through some suffering and maybe destruction of what they believed in. So I also want to ask you about change in this context of transition and wounds of transition. Uh, what is the change in this regard which our societies may need?
I think from this particular perspective, transition is not over. And I will explain looking at this research by Hofstede that looks at specific social values, and one of them that is very important is individualism versus collectivism. That's how Hofstede puts it. I would rather say autonomy. So since we are part of the European Union and we are looking at the so-called West, we want societies that work, that function, and state institutions that function as we see in, I don't know, in Germany or the Netherlands or Spain or France or Italy. The very important distinction is that those societies, especially in Northern Europe, are based on a very high level of autonomy of the individual. This means that an individual learns from early childhood that, look, these are the rules of the game, and if you want to succeed, it's only up to you to get better every day at playing the game within the rules. And it's also up to you that if you don't like one of the specific rules, you can get your friends together, put pressure on the authorities, and try to change that specific rule. In our part of the world, in Bulgaria, Romania, and in Moldova as well, possibly also even in the Ukraine or in Greece and Serbia, I don't know, Macedonia maybe, we are more collectivistic. We think we learn that our success in life depends on who we know, and our loyalty may be to a sort of a clan or a tribe or a family. And then the power of these particular tribes is enough to change the rules that we don't like. The problem that we face and where we definitely need change is that with European integration, within the European Union, we are forced to go towards a state, a society, based on autonomy, not on the collective. But we do not accompany that change with specific measures in terms of education. Our school doesn't have a set of criteria and standards and values that prepares our kids for a society based on autonomy, but we still keep the system of education that enforces collectivism. So this is a tension, this is a cleavage, this is a conflict between how we do things and what we want to achieve. And you surely know, and everybody who listens to us know, that only a fool can do things the same way but expect different results. So this is the type of change that we need. We need to do things another way in order to get a different result. But now the question is, do we really want a different result? Because when you look at our politicians, that is not always very clear. Does it make sense?
Yes, for sure, for sure. You spoke about politicians, and we see, especially in Bulgaria, but also in the Republic of Moldova, maybe even in Romania, rising polarization, which some people like to label it as West versus East or Russia. But for me, maybe given that the countries in the European Union and maybe close to European Union as well, they are more, the division is more technocratic versus sovereignist. That is my understanding. And I want to ask in this sense, with regards to polarization, uh, how does change look in societies of great polarization? I mean, some people have their version of justice, of righteousness, and they think that if they want to change something, they have to rally for one or the other pole. But I'm also curious what stands in the middle between these poles, and is change affirming the poles, or is change more transformation? Is change more accumulation of power over the other side, or is change some kind of renewal where this contradiction is redefined?
That's a difficult question, Vladimir, but with polarization, I think comes a reduction in power, meaning power. When I'm thinking here in power in the sense of the capacity to make change happen in a reasonable span of time. To make a transformation that is hopefully sustainable in the long run, but to achieve this result in a shorter period of time, something that is reasonable, sometimes related to the 4-year mandate that we have between elections. When the society is polarized, the capacity to make this transformation is lower because society is more brittle, fragile. That means it can break at any point. And of course, if the society breaks, then you cannot advance. And this is a paradox. Some politicians believe that polarization will help them achieve more power in the short run, but the result is specifically the other way around. They lose power because they cannot get all the resources that they need to make that transformation. They lose credibility, and then the resources are wasted, and they cannot be part of the conversation when it comes to a new attempt to make a change. So this is a paradox that I think is somewhat provincial in nature. We may have seen this in the past in Greece, Definitely in Spain and Portugal after they joined the European Union. I think as soon as the politicians learn that power to make a sustainable change relies on the people in the middle, that's when our political decision-making systems will heal. And indeed, I think this is another matter of related to change. In this matter, our politicians need to change. I do have my doubts to what extent they have the capacity to understand that, because I don't see many of them being educated well enough to understand this process. But to go back and make it simpler, maybe, people who are very far polarized on the left and the right, let's say, or white and black of the political spectrum, they cannot talk to each other. Because they cannot talk to each other, they can never agree on anything, and that reduces their capacity, either on left or right, white or black, reduces their capacity to make change. What you need is some people that are moderate, closer to the middle, who can listen to the other side, understand the reasoning, point out where there are some similarities, and try to build something based on those similarities. When you have people in the middle, these people can agree on some things, not on all things. And when they agree on some things, then they can create majorities, because that's how our democratic systems work, with a majority that decides on how to make the change, when to make it, with what resources, what are the results that we are looking for, and who is going to be affected, and how do we put some kind of a safety net for those people who are going to be mostly affected by that change. Whereas polarization means that people no longer listen to the other side. Again, whatever is not flexible will break.
Let's start now with the countries we are interested in, and first of all, Romania, of course. You are an expert on good governance, and you have given a number of interviews on Romanian anti-corruption. We know that after 2016 and especially after 2018, a lot of things changed in Romanian anti-corruption fight. Of course, there are some cases when people are still brought to justice, but generally this whole campaign, which was going under Laura Kövesi, was stopped. And a lot of people I speak with, and even in Romanian media, discuss that now we are in another era, let's say, of Romanian politics, where the old parties, the so-called parties of transition, are in power. And I have here a number of questions maybe to ask you, and to understand what happens with the Romanian anti-corruption now. We had between 2019 and 2020, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe no, in fact 2020, 2021, justice minister from the party of Union Save Romania, who was promising to abolished the special section for investigation of crimes in the judicial system. That is effectively the brake which blocks the old type of anti-corruption. And he didn't abolish this special section. So that is my first question would be, why didn't this happen? On the other hand, maybe you're aware of a number of reports where big money seemed to corrupt Romanian security and judicial institutions. I refer especially to the Recorder report on a policeman who claims an influential businessman from one of the regions close to Hungary had access to his personal data within the system of the police. And maybe there is also another case in this sense, that about a judge who was accused of corruption and caught in with some money, but after that the case went in such a direction that the judge was reinstated, and she's even observing now the fight against corruption in her judicial institution. And at least my impression from talk with people is that big money corrupt Romanian institutions, including Presa. There are reporting again. Recorder wrote about how big party money spoil media. So, with this big context, what goes on with Romanian anti-corruption and with the justice in general in Romania after 2018?
Romanian anti-corruption is sort of dead in the water if you look at the anti-corruption prosecution at DNA, because they are no longer active on high-profile cases. There are many explanations for that. When you look at justice in general, the Romanian judiciary received extremely heavy blows during 2017-18 and never managed to recover. It didn't get any help from any politicians. And I think the overall discussion related specifically to rule of law is that the political parties that are in power mainly hate the idea of separation of powers. Now, given these three initial hypotheses, we can go back and discuss the details of your specific questions. You started with the mandate of Stelian Ion, Minister of Justice, back in, I cannot remember, 2020 or 21. That was a time when, after the parliamentary elections, the Liberal Party, together with the Save Romania Union, put together a cabinet, I think with the Hungarian minority as well. And for 1 year, they ruled together. Now, USR, the Save Romania Union, is or was perceived as a very progressive, reformist party, somewhat technocratic, as you put it. But I think they were not prepared to join the cabinet. So I think Stelian Ion got the mandate for Minister of Justice without having a very clear plan regarding what to do as minister. Yes, there was pressure for him to get rid of the special section that investigates crimes committed by magistrates, but he didn't do it. And I think, first of all, he didn't do it because there was not a majority within the cabinet of ministers to take this, to make this decision. The liberals and the Hungarians really didn't want to take on this reform. They preferred for the special section to remain in power. This special section having been established back in 2018, I think, by the Social Democrats. So basically, USR, a sort of minority party in terms of visions and values, was also a minority party in the governing coalition. And on the other side of the bench, there was a huge majority created by the liberals, the Hungarian minority, and the Social Democrats. So from this perspective, if you don't have enough power to make a transformation, then maybe you don't make it. Later on, USR was forced out of the cabinet, and the liberals with the Hungarians joined forces across the aisle with the Social Democrats, and that created the so-called rotation arrangement for the Romanian cabinet. Prime Minister Ciucă from the Liberals maintained this position for about a year and a half, and now we have Mr. Ciolacu from the Social Democrats, again for a mandate of about a year and a half, because we're going to have elections probably in December next year. So this is a sort of a brief way of answering why Stelian Ion didn't go on with that reform. First of all, I think he didn't have this reform as part of his plan. Secondly, I think he miscalculated the resources that were needed in terms of votes. And then when he realized that there was no political support for this particular reform, then he simply quit the idea. Does it make sense?
It sounds plausible. If you wish my opinion, I don't have a fixed opinion on that, but there is this understanding that anti-corruption maybe was doing also division in society. That's what I remember from 2018. So reopening of anti-corruption should mean a leader who does this anti-corruption, and maybe if there is a leader of the type of Laura Kövesi, it would also mean further division, and maybe that is also part of has some logic that Romanian political elites have agreed that there will be no such type of cutting of meat from them. No matter, even if you are technocrat, even if you are progressive, whatever.
I understand that this idea that Romania really doesn't have an anti-corruption champion. I know that Mrs. Kövesi is seen in Bulgaria as a sort of a messiah of anti-corruption, but I have my reservations. I would like to remind you and our listeners that the glory days of Mrs. Kövesi in terms of anti-corruption in Romania were related to a time when DNA worked very, very closely with the Secret Service. And then a lot of questions arose to what extent DNA was really doing anti-corruption or simply serving the agenda of the Secret Service. In 2016, if I'm not mistaken, we all learned in Romanian society about the secret protocol of cooperation between DNA, the anti-corruption prosecution, and SRI, the Romanian intelligence service. And from then on, DNA was no longer seen as the pure messiah that is going to save the nation. In 2017, when Mr. Tudorel Toader, as Minister of Justice, quote-unquote reformed the Romanian judiciary, he basically did everything in his power to make sure that DNA will never have the ability to put politicians in jail or to confiscate their wealth. And then in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Tudorel Toader managed to kill DNA forever by removing Mrs. Kövesi from her office. Now, this particular chain of events was extremely detrimental to the independence of Romanian judiciary, because all of the magistrates, both judges and prosecutors in Romania, are magistrates. All of the magistrates in Romania learned that politicians always have more power and they can kill any idea of reform. So this is the stage where then Stelian Ion came in as Minister of Justice without really having a reform agenda, and then very soon learning that he doesn't have enough allies, supporters, to take that particular reform and make it happen. I'm not trying to defend Stelian Ion. On the contrary, I am very critical, but I am also critical of Mrs. Kövesi, and I think from this particular perspective, when you look at Romania in terms of anti-corruption, you see that two wrongs do not make a right, but rather two wrongs create a larger wrong.
Okay, and I saw in your answer something which makes sense to me for me to ask. Aren't we now in another? If you say there is a even larger wrong, isn't now there isn't down there this problem, which I mentioned to you, that big money corrupt everything. I mean, politicians, media, even the security and judicial institutions. Maybe, of course, it's easy for a journalist to speak sensationalist, but if this strong anti-corruption entity is stopped, uh, who is now countering corruption in Romania? And at least for me, it's
Nobody.
so. Is there this danger, or is it already happening that the big money spoil everything, and something has to be done?
The danger basically came to the surface when PNL, the National Liberal Party, and PSD, the Social Democratic Party, joined forces to create the new government. We have always suspected that there was some type of cooperation behind the scenes between these two parties. But now, since the new coalition with Prime Minister Ciucă and then Prime Minister Ciolacu, this is very much in your face. There is a reform, quote unquote, taking place in the background. It started in 2015-16 when Romania changed the law on party finance. And since PSD, PNL started cooperating on this particular reform, you can see the budget for political parties increasing almost 8 times. That means that now political parties in Romania, especially the ones in power, PNL and PSD, have a lot of money that they can dispense outside of any public scrutiny, with no transparency requirements. And they pump a lot of money into corrupt media. And when I say corrupt media, I mean corrupt in the sense that like a file on your computer gets corrupted. Not corruption in the sense of bribing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because corrupt media no longer serves the public interest to know what is going on, how political power is being exercised. No, these media outlets screen off the way that political power is being exercised to serve the interest of the politicians. This is how basically the Minister of Family Matters and Social Protection managed to extend her patronage to a network of healthcare centers that she was basically milking for subsidies. Because nobody in the mainstream media, which is heavily funded by the political parties, nobody wanted to look into this topic. It's only the independent media, very small outlets, most of them organized as NGOs, such as Recorder that you mentioned, or Rise Project, or the Center for Independent for Media Investigations, and De La Zero. These small outlets are the ones that shed light on decision-making processes. They are the only ones that bring some transparency. And so behind the closed doors, the political parties have a huge network where they play with public money for private interest. From this perspective, corruption in terms of medium level and high level corruption in Romania, I think, increased a lot during the past, say, 4 to 5 years. Even though the perception of corruption in terms of small bribery is getting better. So it looks like on the surface, in what matters to regular individuals, things are getting better, but in fact, the state institutions are rotten to the core because of political corruption.
Okay. There is something which I observe more pronounced in Romania. I mean, Europeanization is a change. I don't know if you agree with that, with such a label on Romania, but I am following Romanian media, especially national media, and I notice, for example, there are first of all some specific media for European affairs, but also national media dedicate a lot of attention to what is going on in Europe. And also, maybe you contest that, but comparing Bulgarian and Romanian debates for EU legislation, such as, for example, the directive on whistleblowers, I also noticed that in Romania there was debate, there were some trainings, while in Bulgaria I have the feeling it passed somehow unnoticed that this legislation was approved. And so I notice from the Bulgarian point of view that Romania somehow discusses more Europe and maybe makes a more conscious effort to be part of European debates or European social life. I noticed that when there are protests of some labor unions in Germany, in France, even in the UK, Romanian media report about that. So it's important that Romanians know social life, not only who is in power in these countries, but also social life in these countries. In this, having said all that, I maybe need to add also that there is a policy of promotion of minorities in Romania, which I have the feeling is more complex than the one in Bulgaria. And all that altogether, for me, suggests that there is some Romanian conscious effort to Europeanize as a way of change. And I wonder how much do you agree with such uh, labeling of Romania or such description of Romanian efforts to change?
It may be the case that I am too close to see it. So I'm not going to dispute your observation, but I would say this. I think that because Romania has a sizable Hungarian-speaking minority, and many of those people also have Hungarian citizenship. And Hungary is another member of the European Union and even a member of the Schengen agreement. It is important for Romanian society to understand how we relate to at least Hungary. Then we do have a very large emigration from Romania. Some figures look at 4 million Romanians across borders. Other statistics look at 6 million. I don't know the exact figure, and I don't think it's important. But when you have a Romanian mayor elected in Spain, or in Germany, that sort of creates a need for the society in general to understand also what is happening in Spain or in Germany. When you have a German mayor in Romania, the mayor of Timișoara, of course, you're going to also look at what's happening with Germany on the European Sea. So the news reporting related to Europe, I think, has its roots in these two explanations. Then you mentioned other minorities. I think possibly because we do have seats in parliament reserved for every minority, also allows for these people to make news. And then, of course, that news is of public interest, is newsworthy. So probably that's why you see that preoccupation of Romanian society with minorities. But that is also true, I think, not just with national minorities, but it's also true with, for instance, sexual minorities. Now, looking back at this interplay between minorities and the European Union, some of the debates in Romanian society are not always about what is the right decision in Brussels, but more often is about why does Brussels want to impose this decision on us. So it's also an outlet for the sovereignist agenda to permeate into national news. And there was a third element that you mentioned, but escaped my mind. Can you please remind me? You said about Europeanization and minorities.
I also
something else.
I also spoke about EU legislation, for example, on whistleblowers or general.
Well, yeah. Well, you know, when it comes to European legislation that is somehow related to corruption and anti-corruption, it's very easy for Romanian society to be activated. But we don't have a similar conversation about the new European legislation on artificial intelligence. We don't really have this type of conversation about the new European legislation related to, I don't know, agriculture. Or if we do, that's very, very rare. Most often than not, we do have debates related to anti-corruption legislation. And to some extent, the whistleblower directive was seen in Romania as directly related to anti-corruption, because Romania used to have a whistleblower protection since 2004, specifically for the public sector, and many corruption cases appeared because some whistleblowers blew the whistle. That's the explanation for that. But for instance, now that the European Union proposed in May a new directive on anti-corruption specifically, nobody talked about the new directive in the Romanian media, because there were some other topics that superseded this new proposal for a new directive. So that's why I'm saying it may be your observation, in a sense, from outside of Romanian society may be true. I am probably too close to see it in the same way.
Okay, you mentioned the sovereignist Romania in its rise.
Yeah.
And that is a huge issue, and I think it deserves attention. Especially in Bulgaria, we are accustomed to there is this understanding that Romanians are some kind of excellent students of Euro-Atlanticism, and I still wonder why Bulgarian media don't notice that maybe somewhere around 25% or even more of Romanian votes right now are probably going to this sector of sovereignist parties. And I wonder, this rise of sovereignism, first of all, I want to ask you what are the reasons for this rise, but also, isn't it time to admit that Romania as well as Bulgaria have such a position in international relations that they have apparently also influences from the East? So Russia, Chinese, and other influences from the East. And I know that sovereignism likes to play this card of tradition and cultural specificity, religion, traditional family, etc. But isn't it also right to say that it is some kind of a political representation of national capital, which is a different story? And finally, what change does sovereignism bring to Romania? My guess is that change is never simply good or bad, but maybe change is something structural, maybe it is qualitative, and just as it happened with Dragnya's stop of anti-corruption, maybe sovereignism will bring some change to Romania, which everyone needs to understand or be prepared for.
Again, very interesting questions, but and the combination makes me think. But I will pick on the easiest one. To what extent the sovereignist movement of Romania relates to national capital? The answer is in absolutely no way. The Romanian sovereignist party, or at least the most visible Romanian sovereignist party, is this Alliance for the Unity of Romanians, does not unite national capital. You have some fringe intellectuals combined with some of the football gallery type of people. This alliance for the unity of Romanians, or whatever it's called, mostly brings together some type of fringe intellectuals with this type of football gallery, let's call them hooligans or something. They appeal to a lot of the lower class voters in Romania, namely the ones that suffer most from the economic inequality that I discussed at the beginning of our interview. So, for instance, a small accountant from an enterprise that used to be public and then was privatized, somebody who doesn't have a higher degree of education, that has recently come out to retirement, and suffers greatly from the failure of the Romanian social assistance system, suffers greatly because of inflation. And it's very easy for people like this to say, it used to be better back when the enterprise was owned by the state. This is the type of agenda of people that are targeted by this particular party. Now, you can bring in a lot of ideological loads on this type of agenda, and you bring in the anti-vaxxers, you bring in the anti-gay, you bring in the fundamentalist religious people, whether they be Orthodox or Baptist or evangelist, some of the neo-Protestant cults. And this is a true umbrella party for a so-called sovereignist movement that is very easy to capture with a sort of a Russian or a Chinese influence, because it goes mostly against the idea of Europeanization. It goes against the idea of change. It advocates for people to maintain our traditions and values and the old ways of doing things, because we now need to chill, to relax. We now deserve quiet and peace. And all of this change brings a lot turmoil. And this would be my explanation for this type of political movement. For the past 30 years or so, Romania has been changing rapidly. We had reform over reform over reform over reform in a lot of areas and fields and domains, and we have never seen the end of it. So there is a number of people who can adapt to this excitement, to this rhythm of change after change, and some people, like entrepreneurs, thrive on this path of continuous change. But there are some people in society who are tired of all of this change, who are tired of all this reform, who really want to put a stop to it and enjoy the sort of benefits that they think rely on tradition, religion, I don't know, mămăligă, instead of prosciutto crudo. I think this is the dynamic. I am not sure to what extent this is similar in Bulgaria with Возрождение, is it called?
Yes.
The Renaissance Party?
Revival, maybe.
Revival.
Yes.
But I am not surprised to see that now there is a party like that in Moldova. And I think it's also called Возрождение, but probably with the Russian name, not I'm not sure how to pronounce it. This may be in Moldova more of an influence from Russia. But I think maybe for Romania and Bulgaria, it's more of a knee-jerk reaction from people who are tired of all of these changes. That's the way I look at it. And I need to go back to your question because you put together again three specific...
I also had the question, what change does sovereignism bring to Romania or will bring?
Well, to be very frank with you, Vladimir, I hope I do not live the day to see that. Because I simply cannot fathom how Romania can succeed to maintain its territorial integrity if we no longer have money coming in from an Austrian bank, a Dutch shipyard, Brussels European funds, or resilience and reconstruction money. I simply cannot imagine how Romania can survive based only on our own mamaliga.
Okay. We are also now...
And if you ask some of these people from the sovereignist movement, what is their vision of how will Romania, I don't know, develop, succeed, they do not have answers. They are not concerned with creating a vision for sovereign Romania. They are only playing the game of opposing whatever is European or whatever is change. And this is an important observation, I think, because that really proves these people do not have a concrete political agenda for the long term. They only play the populist game of being an anti-system type of movement. So from this perspective, I don't even call them a political party, but just a political movement.
Okay, you have a lot of experience with the Republic of Moldova, given that you have been preparing for years the young leaders in justice there, and the government and the president of Moldova have been promoting judicial reforms in the country for some time, also related with some kind of vetting or verification of the judges and members of magistrates. I was wondering, what is your perspective about the results from these reforms and about the implication of young generation of jurists in the country?
I don't have a good opinion of what's happening with the Moldovan justice reform. But I think we need to step back a little bit and think about it this way. whatever Maia Sandu, the president of Moldova, and the former prime minister Kiku, and then prime minister Gavrilița, and now prime minister Recean, what they propose is a judicial reform that is actually a proxy for two other political objectives. And these other two political objectives are actually the so-called de-oligarchization of the country and the so-called de-Russification of the country. Let me explain this a little bit. So when Maia Sandu and her party came to power about 3 years ago, this was made in stages, but I'm not going into details. What they proposed in essence was for Moldova to get rid of the oligarchic influence of people like Plahotniuc and Platon, and I don't know, a plethora of other names, and also get rid of the Russian influence that came in through Dodon, what's his name, and the electorate in Moldova bought this idea. Now, how do you operationalize if you're Maia Sandu and the other people around her in this political party, and you win the elections? How do you operationalize the two concepts? Well, you propose a justice reform, which apparently will help you create an independent judiciary in Moldova with all the resources that it needs to pass judgments that actually take all of those oligarchs and all of those agents of Russia out of the public sphere. Well, possibly put them into jail, but the point is to take them out of the public sphere. That's an interesting idea, something that we can applaud. Sounds like a legitimate and valid objective. Now, how they proposed to do this was to create a system for vetting the integrity of judges and prosecutors that is inspired from what happened in Albania and the Ukraine. And they put it into place, and we are now 2 years later, and we don't see any results. Originally, the vetting process was designed in such a way to accommodate for the fact that the integrity agency of Moldova was very weak and didn't have the ability to check the integrity of judges and prosecutors. And also that the fiscal authority in Moldova was very weak and didn't have the capacity to check the wealth, especially the unjustified wealth of some judges and prosecutors in Moldova. So they created this exceptional instrument called the vetting committee. There is also a pre-vetting committee, but I'm not getting into all the details. And this committee is supposed to check on the integrity and on the accumulated wealth of judges and prosecutors. 2 years later, they didn't manage to check more than, 50 people, the ones that decided to run as candidates for the Supreme Council of Magistrates and the Supreme Council of Prosecutors. And in the meanwhile, they have not transferred any of the good practices to either the Integrity Agency or to the Fiscal Authority. So I think from this perspective, we are looking at 2 years where the judicial reform in Moldova managed to confuse a lot of people, but didn't really produce any concrete results. And this is probably why, when you look at what is happening in the justice system in Moldova today, you see there is a lot of turmoil, a lot of tension, a lot of conflict. And of course, this is very useful for politicians in opposition to capitalize on and claim that Maia Sandu failed in her reform, but also to give some people in the judiciary enough ammunition, so to say, to claim that this is a failed reform and things should go back to where we started. Does it make sense, all of this picture, all of this landscape for Moldova?
It makes sense, but I have the feeling Moldova is a very difficult case where somebody wants to do change, and I wanted to ask you about that as well. Maybe in European Union, somehow there is some kind of center, more established center in society, and whenever I interact with Moldovans or read about Moldova, I have the feeling there is this very strong polarization between West and East, Romanian and Russian language, technocrats and populists or oligarchs. I have difficulty to find the center in Moldova, and I have the feeling in Bulgaria and Romania it is somehow more easy, more possible to establish where the center is. So I have a question about that. First of all, the general question: how is change being done in such a very polarized society, including geopolitically polarized? And on the other hand, I'm also curious because if you remember, we spoke about Moldova somewhere around 2017 or 18 in another interview of ours, and you mentioned then that Poland has made much bolder steps than Romania at that moment towards the Republic of Moldova. And I also wanted to ask you what is the importance of Poland and Romania now for the reforms in the Republic of Moldova?
Indeed, some years ago, almost 10 years ago, Poland was a lot more influential in Chisinau because they saw, Poland saw a sort of an important stepping stone for Polish interests into Ukraine going through Moldova. And for Poland, getting rid of Russian influence in Moldova was just as important as getting rid of Russian influence in Ukraine. For the past maybe 5 years or so, Poland is no longer that visible in Moldova for two specific reasons. One, because Poland had to defend some of its judicial reforms in relation to Brussels, and especially to the European Court in Luxembourg. And the second, because in Moldova came a lot more international actors that have an agenda to make sure that Moldova remains attached to the European perspective and doesn't fall into Russian hands. So now in Chisinau, you have a very strong presence from institutions like the World Bank and OECD and OSCE and the UNDP and all sorts of international funds and foundations, all of them converging in interest with the current government and with the current president of Moldova in trying to maintain Moldova as part of the European West. So this is about the Polish influence, but to go back to how you deal with change, you are very right that Moldovan society is a lot more polarized. And you are also very right, there seems to be no center. Now, it's important to think about what is Moldovan identity in relation to the state that is called the Republic of Moldova. For about 30 years since the fall of the Soviet Union, to when Maia Sandu and her government came into place in Chisinau, I don't think that anybody in Moldova had a 20-year plan for their future. That's simply because in Moldova, people did not really feel secure that the Republic of Moldova, the state, will be there in the next 20 years. It's a matter of identity related to statehood. Now, what changed for the past at least 2-3 years is that all of a sudden, Moldova has an agenda that relates to accession to the European Union. And this agenda is very clearly articulated. Not only very clearly articulated, but also predicated on a number of changes that the Moldovan people feel, so to say, with their own senses, on their own skin. And I give you a number of examples. The Ukrainian refugees, all throughout last year and also this year, but mainly the most important moment in time is last year. I think about 1.5 million refugees came through Moldova to later on go through Romania, Bulgaria, and so on to the west. The Moldovan people were all of a sudden in this situation where not only they were required to help, but they realized that economically they can help. This boosted their sense of self-worth, because all of a sudden they realized they are no longer the poorest country in Europe, but they are the poorest country in Europe that can afford to help 1 million refugees. This is a very important shift in public perception of self-value, self-worth for the Moldovan people. Before that was the pandemic. The way that Moldova managed to manage the pandemic with the vaccination effort gave especially the Moldovan elite, especially in the Moldovan big cities such as Chișinău or Bălți or Ungheni or I don't know, even Tiraspol, gave them the sense that all of a sudden that state, which they thought was weak and incapable of doing anything, it is able to manage a vaccination campaign. This boosted a lot of their feelings in terms of trust in public institutions. And when you step back even more before the pandemic, Moldova managed within only about a year and a half, maybe 2 years, to withstand the economic shock related to the economic sanctions against Russia. What's it called? The boycott that was dictated in a sense against Russia after their invasion of Crimea. When Moldova was forced to stop all economic ties with the Russian Federation and reorient all of its exports, primarily vegetables and fruit and wine, and I don't know, handicraft, reorient them from Russia towards the European Union. And they succeeded in doing that in a very short period of time, about 1 year and a half to 2 years. So when you put all of these events on a timeline next to each other, you see the Moldovan people for the past 5 or 7 years managing to restructure their economy when faced with the economic sanctions against Russia, then manage the pandemic, the vaccination campaign, not very successful, but more successful than anybody predicted within Moldova, and then manage the flow of Ukrainian refugees. These 3 events put together are transformative for the idea of statehood for the Republic of Moldova and for the Moldovan nation put together. And this relates in a sense to how Maia Sandu and her party conducted the electoral campaigns for the first time, including messages related to the Russian-speaking minority and to the Ukrainian-speaking minority and to the Bulgarian-speaking minority and to the Turkish-speaking minority, because they all of a sudden they were inclusive. And after that inclusive electoral campaign, you got the inclusive vaccination, where people did not sense discrimination. And then the flow of refugees, where again, people did not sense discrimination, but on the contrary, they sensed a lot of solidarity, where for Ukrainians that didn't speak Romanian, it was easy for a Russian-speaking Moldovan to translate. And then for a Romanian-speaking Moldovan to accompany Ukrainian refugees into Romania and help them with their papers. So I think this is a spectacular moment in time where, to go back to your question, the initial polarization, which is still present in Romanian, in Moldovan society, also got an outlet for solidarity and for people coming together, for togetherness. There is now channeled into a very clear political direction, which is accession to the European Union. And I feel that there is a very clear majority in the Moldovan society in support of this particular project. But we'll have to see what happens in the next elections. And they're going to have local government elections on November 5, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, it is great that Moldova undergoes change, but we are in a region in which we are very cynical that change is possible. And I want to ask you or challenge you in this way. What happens with Maia Sandu's change or attempted change if a Republican president comes to the White House after the 2024 elections?
I really don't know. I am not sure that the United States are so influential in terms of Moldovan politics. I understand that they do have an interest to check on the 14th Russian army that is stationed in Transnistria. I do understand that the Americans have an interest in keeping the oligarchs and the Russian agents as far as possible from the Moldovan government. But I don't think that the Democrats and the Republicans in the United States have a different agenda when it comes to Moldova. I think they pretty much converge on the same political objectives. Even if you believe that a Republican president can be a puppet in the hands of Putin, I cannot see the Americans pulling out of Moldova to favor Russia, simply because Brussels, the European Union, is so vested in Moldova, and also the World Bank, that the Americans really couldn't pull out unless they wanted to antagonize both the European Union and the World Bank. And I don't think the American economy is in any place to afford that.
Okay.
So in short, my answer would be that I don't know. But the longer answer is I don't know if the United States would want to play that card in Moldova.
Okay. Maybe it is a speculation, but we are now switching to Bulgarian situation, and you know that after the 2021 fall of Borisov government, a party called Change Continues appeared, and it was a party which promised change with very specific names. I mean, it was against Borisov, it was against Peevski, which is an influential businessman from the party of the ethnic Turks movement for rights and freedom, and it was also against the prosecutor chief. Now, it happened, this change in Bulgaria happened after Biden came to power in the White House. And of course, I know there are different influences and maybe it's not so simple, but I somehow believe that the fact that Biden was in the White House maybe had some positive role for this party to come into power. However, you know well that in the recent times, this party formed or now rules together with Borisov, and a lot of the legislation is also accepted with the support even of Peevski, even of with his signature and his party, of course. So in this sense, Bulgarian society now no longer has this contradiction between anti-corruption and mafia, which existed before, because in a way they are together. If you allow me to joke a little bit with labels, but now the contradiction is between pro-European Commission government and a sovereignist president, or maybe other forces which also are sovereignist. And in this way, I want to ask you maybe to start with a small question. Is the Bulgarian case, which maybe you know as well, with these recent changes and realignments, doesn't it show that change in Bulgaria doesn't happen or it will not happen through politics or through parties? That maybe Bulgaria is a specific case of peripheral or a little bit more Eastern society, but also part of the West, needs some more complex, more specific approach than just making a party which is called change and just this party taking power. It is not sufficient, at least from my point of view, but maybe you have your own considerations.
But the party is Promiana Produjava.
Exactly, change continues. It is the party of Kirill Petkov and Arsen Vasilev.
I think I think the key component in the name of the party is that it continues. And let me explain why I think that. This type of coalition, so to say, between the progressive forces, which is Promiana Produjava with Democratična Bulgaria, and I don't know which other party, I cannot remember. But the progressives allied with one of the old parties, one of the parties that is, so to say, preferring the status quo, GERB. We've seen that before. We've seen that in the Moldovan case, when Maia Sandu's party joined forces with the oligarch Plahotniuc, the Democratic Party, in order to create a government opposing President Dodon, which is supposed to be a Russian agent. So the progressive movement sided with the oligarchs to counterbalance the Russian agent. They did some small reforms before that particular cabinet went to pieces. And later on, Maia Sandu's party came to power in full, putting aside both the Russian agent and the oligarch. And whatever they're doing with the reform is the new Moldovan politics. You've seen that in Romania about 15 years ago, when civil society helped the Năstase government, 15, almost 20 years ago, civil society helped the Năstase government, social democrat, probably the most corrupt prime minister that Romania had, to succeed on the path of European accession. So sometimes you need people from the moderate center to ally with people from the other side in order to ensure that whatever change you want continues. By the same token, USR in Romania 2-3 years ago did not succeed because they didn't properly plan and calculate their moves. I am not sure whether Kirillov and the other people will succeed in Bulgaria. What I'm trying to say is that from a political perspective, I don't think that they had another choice. And I applaud their courage to make that decision. And in contrast to the Romanian case of 3 years ago, I think they negotiated very properly. They learned the Romanian lesson, and they negotiated very properly access to decision-making power. In this case, if Stelian Ion back then had the same political arrangement, he could have succeeded with that particular reform that you asked me at the beginning. Because he didn't have it, he didn't succeed in any way. He didn't even attempt the reform. So to go back, this is why I'm saying that the key ingredient is that it continues, not necessarily that it changes. Because it's clear for the Bulgarian society that de-oligarchization is important, is needed. I think the pace of that reform is important, and I think that ensuring the success of that reform is also important, and also ensuring the sustainability of that reform is important. For now, what Promiana Produljava is doing, I think, is that they secure the decision to make the change, some of the resources to ensure that the change will be made, and I think they will continue to work on ensuring sustainability, but I don't see that as yet. This may be a plan for the future. We'll see how they negotiate that. For instance, I think it's a very important signal. I think also for Romanian politics, that they negotiated that the next prime minister will be a European commissioner that secures ties with Brussels that in Romania are impossible to predict. From this perspective, it looks at this point in time that Europeanization is more on the agenda of the Bulgarian government because of the future prime minister than it is on the agenda of the Romanian government, because we have no idea what's going to happen after the elections in Romania next year.
We are approaching the issue of agency, which I announced in the beginning. And for me, there is something, it took me a lot of time, of course, to find out that. And of course, I'm still not completely sure about it, but I have the feeling that Bulgarians somehow have a bridge aspect, or at least their allies, or maybe the successful parts of their allies have a bridge aspect. And I will explain now what I mean. First of all, internationally, maybe you know there are some very successful Bulgarians as figures, like Kristalina Georgieva at the World Bank and Irina Bokova, who is a former UNESCO head. And I believe both of them have a bridge aspect in the sense that, for example, Kristalina Georgieva, she was European Commissioner, she was at the World Bank, she's so... it is generally considered to have the support of Great Britain, but she also had a period when she was in Moscow during her World Bank years some time ago. And at the same time, Irina Bokova, when she was candidate for Secretary General of the United Nations, which you know is a very high-ranking position, it was believed that she has the support of 4 of the 5 Security Council members. So these were USA, France, Russia, and China. And only the UK was in fact advancing Kristalina Georgieva. And now that is a curious aspect of Bulgarians, in my view. Bulgarian Prime Minister couldn't make a choice. He was pressed from various countries to support one or the other. And in the end, Bulgaria had 2 candidates for the Security Council of the United Nations, the Secretary General of Security Council of the United Nations. And you know, they both failed as a result of this difficulty of Bulgarians to make a choice. But still, I think both persons, both Irina Bokova and Kristalina Georgieva were the candidates. They both represent, for me at least, a bridge aspect of, and it is a successful bridge aspect. They're respected. There is, I haven't heard any intrigue about them. So in any case, that is one thing about Bulgarian maybe politics or allies. This bridge idea. And the other thing is that now maybe you know these people because they studied at the American University as well. I refer to Hristo Ivanov and Vasil Terziev. Hristo Ivanov is maybe the most famous reformer as a politician. With the he comes with the label of a reformer of the judicial system, and he's one of the main figures of the Democratic Bulgaria party, which is generally pro-Western, let's say, is considered. But for me, it's curious that he is constantly accused by some people, including in his circles, that his family is having some communist or socialist origins. And in fact, I remember an interview with his mother in 2014 or 15, when she said that she shared some parts of the family history, and she was at that time, if I'm not mistaken, the head of a local organization of the Socialist Party in Sofia. And I can go even more with the family story. It's very interesting. No, I don't say it's a fault. I mean, of course, from some point of view, it might be a fault, but I say that it's exactly the bridge aspect. This the idea that you have something of the modernity or of the technocratic aspect of politics, but you also have something of the older times. And and I'm not a fan of Hristo Ivanov. Let's say I'm not promoting him, but I see this bridge aspect in his image, political role, let's say, or image. And the same thing about Vasil Terziev, who is now the candidate for mayor of Sofia, and there is this tendency now in Bulgaria to look for successful businessmen in the IT sector or self-made people, etc. This legend goes that capitalism allows for success of the knowledgeable people or capable people, and he's representative or trying to play the role of such a successful person. But it was immediately revealed when his candidature was announced that he comes from a family who had high-ranking positions in the old security before 1989. I make this long introduction because I have the feeling Bulgarian subjectivity or Bulgarian agency, if you wish, has to do something with the bridge aspect. And it's not only west or east, there could be different poles, there could be different um, shores or river banks, but the bridge aspect somehow always appears on the surface. And I want to ask you about that. First of all, um, if you see sense in this theory about bridge agency of Bulgarians, uh, what what is it good for, let's say, or what could be its merits, not only in Bulgaria but regionally. And secondly, if there is legitimacy in this theory of the bridge agency, what is the agency of Romanians and Moldovans? I have the feeling you might have thought about this thing. Sorry if it's too challenging, but maybe there is some essence in Romanians and Moldovans too.
Well, you see, I look at agency from the perspective that it implies a number of things. I think it implies, first of all, clarity about the end result. Then it implies clarity about the means and the resources. Then the capacity or the ability to bring in all of those resources and channel them into creating that end result. So I think you for agency is a term that brings together all of these attributes, and it's important to keep them all together. With this idea in mind, when you talk about the bridge aspect, this relates a lot to the capacity of an individual to bring together all the resources and the allies that a specific project needs. Whether they get these resources or allies from family ties, from the ability to listen to the other side, from some kind of an accident maybe in their life, I really don't see much of a difference. If Bulgarians do have that capacity to bring together resources and allies in order to achieve a specific objective, kudos to the Bulgarian people or to the Bulgarian politicians that have the ability to do that. In Romania, I am not sure that we do have that capacity, because first and foremost, we lack the ability to formulate a clear objective. So, because we don't have clarity towards the end result, it's difficult to bring in resources and to build your own capacity, to develop the capacity to put those resources to work in a good direction. We in Romania, we sort of lack the ability to formulate clear objectives. For Moldova, I think it's a little different. And what is happening now in Moldova in terms of the accession to the European Union shows me that they now do have a clear objective. Let's see to what extent they can bring together all the resources and the allies that they need, because they do have access to resources, but it's more difficult for them to bring in allies. And very seldom in life you can succeed only on your own. But I think these would be the differences between agency in our three countries, if it makes sense to you.
Yes, I tried reading something about Anthony Giddens' understanding of agency, because I know he's one of the big theoreticians about it, and I also read other stuff, and I have the feeling agency maybe could be seen also as some capacity of individuals to act independently and make free choices, including in conditions of strong political and hegemonic structures, and do change in spite of these structures. So it's somehow related to your idea of autonomy, which you discussed previously. And it could be a property of people, but also of organizations. I want now to take out a little bit, take back a little bit our look from our individual countries, and look a little bit more in general to our region and to compare it to Western Europe or the USA, because different social context, different political and any culture, in fact, different culture maybe hints at different properties of the people who have, or organizations who have agency. And I have the feeling many theories about agency deal with some kind of clean environment where people just act or just are. But I'm aware in our region of a fallen nature. So, I have the feeling often in our region, maybe somebody has some level of agency, but there is also some kind of fallen nature and of his person or his organizations. It's not pure essence. It is somehow something which is still to be emancipated, maybe. And I want to ask in this sense, what could be the specifics of agency in general in Southeastern Europe, and how exactly this population of ours, which generally is not very much involved in political or social action, there is always this understanding that people are generally apathetic and withdrawn from life. How could greater level of agency be encouraged and promoted in our region?
Well, I think it does relate to the autonomy discussion that we had at the beginning. And again, in a collectivist society, from Hofstede's understanding of relying on the collective, the tribe, the group, whatever, you can look at agency, for instance, at China. Think about the reform that China had to go through when computers first appeared. And computers are very good at typing with a QWERTY keyboard, but that is not very useful when you have 10,000 ideograms to write in Chinese. So, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago, China was even considering the idea of ditching the Chinese alphabet just to make sure that they can use computers. But the collectivist agency of a country like China translates in the ability to formulate an objective and pulling resources, because everybody believes that the collective makes better decisions. In our neck of the woods, in Western Europe, where we want to be, agency is more related to the individual, to the autonomy that an individual can muster when they see something that they think is wrong, and they set on changing the rules in such a way that injustice is done away with. Because our societies, Romania, Bulgaria, other people in the Balkans, even Hungary to some extent, are a bit more collective than we would like. We see that I believe in an objective set by my group, you believe in another objective set by your group, and because of group allegiance, collectivism, the two objectives come into conflict. Now, this is a problem because we do not educate individuals in terms of autonomy so that they can go and bring in allies one by one. But we think that a sort of a battle must entail between my group and your group, and whoever wins will get the cake and eat it too. So when we relate agency to the way our societies function today, we understand two things. Number one, as long as we keep being collectivist, we will not be able to muster the agency, the autonomous individual agency that we admire in Western Europe. And if we don't educate individuals to become autonomous, they will not be able to muster the agency that we admire in Western Europe. And apparently, we have made this decision that we don't want to be like China, but we do want to be like Western Europe. So we only have one choice, and that one choice is to make sure that in our societies we educate individuals toward autonomy, and that we sever the ties that keep these groups, collectives, tribes together. But we are not moving at the right pace in this direction, and it's going to take a lot more time than we would like. Unless this is a very conscientious effort, because otherwise we can forget about it and allow time to fix it. And then if you allow time to fix it, it will get fixed, but maybe in 100 years. And we want it fixed in maybe in 10 years. So this is the choice that we have.
Okay. You mentioned well that yes.
And Vladimir, you can. I'm sorry, just 1 second. You can see this new trend about agency related to autonomy in our region. You can see it if you look at a number of social movements with minorities. The type of feminism that we have in the Balkans is very different from the feminism that we had, I don't know, 50 years ago in the UK and the United States. Because in the UK and the United States 50 years ago, feminism was related to a collective agency of all women and relied on bringing in some allies from amongst the men. But in Romania, Bulgaria, Moldova, I'm sure if you look at it in Macedonia or in Albania, possibly even in Greece or Turkey, you will see that feminism is predicated on the autonomous agency of a woman who wants to be seen as equal and respected as a human being, not in comparison to a man, but in comparison to any other human being. And I think this is a very important shift in the way that we think about agency and autonomy in the Balkans. You also see that happening with the sexual minorities of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and so on. I think you also see it with the Roma minority. I don't know in Bulgaria, but I do know about it in Romania, and that's for sure how it goes. So it may be the case that we will see this model being replicated in more walks of life, in more areas of human interaction, because it sort of proves successful in a way.
Okay. You mentioned the feminist agency, and I'm sure that maybe some people could discuss about Orthodox or Protestant agency. I mean, these groups, religious groups, they also want to change something in society. They also promote some values, etc. And now we may reach, or maybe already have reached, a situation in which it's full of change agents around, but the change of one group of them maybe is against the change of the other and neutralizes the change of the others. And I think that makes once again important the issue of the center or of the balancer type of person, some kind of a person or organization or structure which plays the role of equilibrium, because we may well imagine that every agency or every group has its righteousness or justice valid within certain limits, and it becomes also important what are the limits. So
yeah, but I think the bridge is a better metaphor than the balance, the equilibrium, because the bridge brings allies together and also maintains the balance. A bridge that doesn't maintain the balance will collapse. But the bridge not only maintains the balance, it also brings allies together. And again, agency means that you have a clear objective, you have the resources and the allies, and the capacity to bring them together and channel their efforts in order to achieve the objective. So I think what we need is not necessarily a center that keeps the balance, but a center that bridges alliances between changes or objectives that are compatible. Now, it may be the case that some of the objectives that are not compatible will remain on the fringes, and they will probably continue to contribute to polarization. But I would very much like to focus on those objectives that relate to the bridge in the center, the one that brings everybody together. And that is mostly going to relate to some of the core values of togetherness and equality or equity, if you want, respect for human dignity. And this is not ideological to the left or to the right. This is simply human nature.
Okay, I can't help also asking you about journalism and change, because journalism is something like the thing that stands in between all the justices, all the rightfulnesses, all the change agents. It's some kind of a middle ground. Media is the middle ground. But it is also deeply discredited profession in Bulgaria, and it is reduced to a large extent to being propaganda outlet for the political and economic powers in society. So, in fact, journalists, at least in Bulgaria, in my view, very rarely have their own agency. Most of the time, we are encouraged to just translate or don't mess with strong interests. It requires, as you said, a lot of qualities are necessary for being agent or having agency, but also a lot of qualities, maybe even more, are required if you want to be a journalist who does something like change through his work. And also journalism or the press often becomes something like a stick. So when various economic groups or political parties want to battle, they battle through journalists. They use journalists as weapon. So in this sense, what is the potential of journalism to bring change in our region when it has such a fallen nature in general? But
Vladimir, I think we need to differentiate two very important aspects related to journalism. One is how journalism in general reflects the news. And this is a place where journalism cannot have agency. A place where journalism cannot attempt to change anything. If journalism simply reflects the news, then the journalist doesn't need to have an agenda other than the public interest. The other side of the coin is when you look at journalism as the group of people that are doing this job. Within this guild, so to say, journalists should have agency and should have specific objectives for change, in the sense that a journalist that agrees to become the stick of a politician or the propaganda outlet of a political party or the face of a specific oligarchic interest or the ally of a foreign agent. These should no longer be journalists. So it befalls on the guild of journalists to make a change in terms of professional ethics, to make sure that they ostracize the people who present themselves as journalists, but they're doing another job. Now, from this second perspective, I do see that journalists have a lot of problems. The media, the press has a lot of problems, especially trust issues, not only in Bulgaria, but very heavily in Romania and in Moldova as well. Do I also see a movement of the professional guild of journalists to get rid of the rotten apples? Not very strong. So I believe there is a role for agency and for change, but not with respect to society and how we do the news, but with respect to how we do the job, with respect to professional ethics. Does it make sense to you?
Very much, yes, for sure. We had already quite a long talk, and I want to make some kind of official ending, even though I may have something to say after that ending. But I want to ask you, as a kind of final words or preliminary final words, if I may say. We have discussed about Southeastern Europe, and we touched a lot of issues. We touched polarization, we touched agency in this region, a lot of actors, a lot of interests, and at the end of the day, what is the future of our region? I would ask you to present a positive and a negative scenario or version of what could happen in the next few years in our region.
I think there is a very interesting theory that you can divide et impera, the Latin divide and conquer. It goes like this: if you can fragment a society, then little by little isolate the fragments. What will happen is that they get out of sync, they desynchronize. And when a society is fragmented, the fragments are isolated, and then the isolated fragments are desynchronized, you get a mass of people that you can very easily manipulate, therefore conquer. What happens in the region, at least since accession to the European Union, 2004, 2007, is that some elements of society are more increasingly synchronized with the West, whereas other elements of society are fragmented, isolated, and desynchronized. So the good scenario, the optimistic view of what the future brings, is that the synchronized elements of our societies start building bridges in such a way that their synchronicity starts to spill over and provide development for everybody else. The bad scenario, the pessimistic view, is that the polarization among the isolated and desynchronized fragments gets so strong that we see a sort of a dissolution of the state and division in smaller political entities that cannot talk to each other. So burning the bridges. I am an optimist myself. I can be very dark when I describe specific political phenomena, but I am an optimist myself, and I strongly believe that we are headed in the direction of more and more synchronicity. The bridges over the Danube are a very good, or over the Prut River are very good metaphors for that. But I do believe that we are increasingly becoming more European, so-called Western, quote unquote, and that means that there is a brighter future, not only for us too, when we're going to retire in about 20 years or so, but more specifically for the kids that will be born next year in Romania, Bulgaria, and Moldova. When these kids will get of age at about 40 or 50, like we are today, life is going to be a lot better for them than it is for us today.
Okay, I'm happy we end on a very positive note. I do believe our talk, and especially your perspectives, expanded the frames in which we think about all these issues. And I really hope that our readers somehow get good insights and ideas and maybe get some hope as well. And I believe we will continue with such type of podcasts when we feel there is need for that. So thank you. And I want now, as an exception maybe, but I want to make a bonus question or issue. And I know I already took you maybe 2 hours and a half or something like that. So I'm sorry for taking so much time. But I have this issue which we remained, which we didn't discuss. Mini-Schengen between Bulgaria and Romania. When you speak about bridges, when you speak about synchronization, it is an issue which we first touched in 2019, if you remember, and I want somehow to make a return to that interview and even kind of ask you the same questions, not the least because the Bulgarian national radio seems to have interest in this issue, and I, as a separate bonus of this podcast, I want to offer this interview also to them. So first of all, let me ask you this. We know that Bulgaria and Romania have difficulties to convince, especially Austria, maybe even Netherlands to some extent. In the case of Bulgaria, have difficulty to convince they need to be admitted to the large Schengen. And what benefits could this idea of Bulgarian and Romanian mini-Schengen bring to the two countries? What would it mean technically, juridically, procedurally? What will be better if it is introduced?
Well, I've been proposing this mini Schengen for almost 10 years now, and it never happened. I don't know if it is still possible today, or not necessarily possible, but how to put it. There was this very recent meeting between Scholz and Nehammer, the chancellors of Germany and Austria, and they also discussed about Schengen with relation to Romania and Bulgaria. And it seems that Austria is adamant with respect to both countries that no. Now, my thought is that if Romania and Bulgaria meet and decide to put the Schengen agreement in practice in between the two countries, it will prove that it works. It will prove to Austria, the Netherlands, and who else is interested, that our claims that we are technically prepared holds water. And then the space in between Greece, Turkey, and I don't know, Hungary in the West is only one Schengen area between Romania and Moldova, between Romania and Bulgaria, that works exactly like the other Schengen area to the west in Hungary and to the south in Greece. Now, from a legal perspective, we don't need the agreement of the other European Union countries to start this cross-border cooperation between Romania and Bulgaria. This is only up to our own two governments. And it would be probably the most important, ambitious, and transformative objective of the recent treaty that our presidents signed. What's it called? The
Joint Declaration for a Strategic Partnership.
Strategic partnership. So what is more strategic than that? You asked me about the economic implications. I am not an expert on economy, so I really don't know. But there must be some cost cutting for transportation when you think of all the lorries that wait in line when they cross the border from Greece to Bulgaria, then from Bulgaria to Romania, and then from Romania to Hungary. at least they can cut the waiting time and the cost of waiting at the Romanian-Bulgarian border. What else? What else did you ask me? Legal, economic, and what?
Yes, procedures. What will change in these terms?
I think what will change in terms of procedures if we do the mini-Schengen today is the exact same thing as it would change if we are admitted to Schengen in 2 years' time. The difference is that we bring in the procedures 2 years earlier. I know that there is talk about both Romania and Bulgaria joining the Schengen aerial space. That is, it's not going to create problems for individual passengers that fly into our airports. But that's not the big impact on, I mean, there is a big impact in terms of perception because of individuals who travel, but the real economic impact is going to be on the roads and on the railways and on the ships, because this is where the economy needs the cost cut. And that's why Schengen exists, not for tourism, but for imports, exports. So if we created a mini-Schengen, that would be the first bridge that actually helps us synchronize before we enter the European Union, in a sense. Because think about it, the approach up to now, since 2007, was that all right, now we are part of the European Union. What we need to do is synchronize with the West. And Romania started its own path to convergence, and Bulgaria started its separate own path to convergence. What I am advocating when I say mini-Schengen is that Romania and Bulgaria join forces across the bridge to start synchronizing themselves and opening a new path together towards Western Europe. It may be a dream, it may be the case it's not going to happen, but I still think it would have been a good idea.
Some of the opposition to this mini-Schengen idea between Bulgaria and Romania is that if the two countries go towards an alternative to the big Schengen, they somehow admit they will remain in the periphery. They somehow accept that they don't fight for the biggest for the big Schengen. That is one argument. But there is also this argument that peripheries don't cooperate with one another. They compete for the attention of the center. And if Bulgaria and Romania cooperate, they will have a logic of the center, and it will move them closer to the center. How do you see these two arguments? Which has more value for you?
I think the second argument has more value, and I don't need to bring another argument to the table than remember that Serbia, Macedonia, and Albania decided 2 years ago to create their own mini-Schengen. Since these countries, with their politicians, realize that creating a mini-Schengen is important to their economies, and it's important also to the accession to the EU process for Macedonia and Albania. Also maybe for Serbia. But if it doesn't hurt them, why would it hurt us?
Okay, but there is also this issue of trust between Bulgarian elites and Romanian elites. Maybe you are aware of this issue as well. One can guess that mini-Schengen requires greater level of trust. And do we have such level of trust which is necessary for managing of common border?
I think this is a chicken and egg question. Do we need more trust in order to cooperate? Or do we need to cooperate in order to trust more? If we don't start somewhere, nothing will happen. And when nothing happens, remember the conversation about the little puddle of water. It starts to rotten and evaporate and die. So we need a change. Now, this change, it's a lot more easier to get by starting the mini-Schengen cooperation than by simply doing nothing about it. Because really, right now, it looks like the only thing that our ministers of foreign affairs, the only thing that they do is they go and court the Austrian and Dutch governments and ask, but what is it we can do? But what is it we can do? Well, they will never come up with a specific answer because they have different political agenda. So we need to do something else. Otherwise, again, if we keep on doing the same thing, we cannot expect different results. We need to do something else.
Okay, final question. We have now both foreign ministers related to European institutions, Luminița Odobescu and Maria Gabriel. Do you expect that they will be more innovative in this regard to...
No.
Why?
No, because they were socialized in the ways of the European institutions, and I don't think they have the ability to think outside the box. This is not a criticism. This is just an observation that when you are socialized in a specific way of doing things for a very long time, then it's very difficult to think outside the box. If we had individuals with different perspectives coming into the ministries of foreign affairs, then those individuals could have started to think outside the box and ask their advisors, okay, but why wouldn't they entertain this idea? So it's a matter of, again, agency. Do you have a clear objective? Can you identify the resources and the allies? Can you then put it to work in order to achieve the objective? For Mrs. Odobescu and Mrs. Gabriel, I think they cannot formulate an objective that is outside the box of the EU socialization process.
Okay, Codru, thank you very much for this long-lasting and I hope also maybe prolific interview.